Hi guys. I guess this is probably going to be called embedded knowledge. Barry spoke this morning and he and I actually have very, very similar theories and very similar approaches to how to secure TICs. I am really interested though, people in the room, who here, hands up, have been involved in trying to stop an attack on a TIC or on a network from outside? 1, 2, a third of you, okay. Maybe we'll come back to that later on. I'm Andy Morrison. I run a business called Andisa IT. We're based in Leeds, or near Leeds. And like everything, we've got a techie problem. Here we go. One of the things we do is we provide a MikroTik consultancy and an IT consultancy worldwide. I'll show you a couple of our projects later on. Our specialism at work, though, MikroTik router consultancy, particularly 2011, 3011s, helping people. We work very closely with other IT providers as well as our on-premise systems, helping people install VoIP, helping install people with Unify access points, MikroTik access points, and we'll go anywhere in the world. Our staff are MTCNA, CRE, CWE qualified. It's worth going on the training. Go and get certified if you can. I run a network which is out in Nepal, and last year I went out and took part in the MUM out there. That was fantastic. It was about this size, the very first one. 300 people turned up. Actually, 300 people registered, and I think 400 people turned up because they found out there was a free router. So we're happy. Some people don't do this, but although we have our own IT on-premises break-fix support and things, we're actually happy to work with other IT providers. Something a little bit unusual, but if you get problems with TICs, give us a call. We will help. We've got a 400 square kilometre wireless network in Nepal, delivering internet service to schools. It was fascinating, was the last talk actually. We've been through exactly the same history and story as that, all the same learning terms. In Nepal, they installed a big bridge network. It all had to be pulled out, turned into a routed network, had to go educate them, teach them how to put in networks. Fascinating story, and we were there, we wanted to measure the bandwidth from one end of the country to the other, from Kathmandu to Pokhara. And we went and did some bandwidth testing across the link. One of the things we said to him was, how do you know it's not contended, that there isn't other traffic there? We want to measure the proper thing. So this guy showed me this network cable and said, that's India. And this one's China. And literally disconnected Nepal. They have a whole different attitude to reliability. We do things like Ripon Cathedral, we look after. They've got 5 buildings. When we first started there, they had 5 buildings all connected with VPNs down broadband links at each site. They were spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds on connectivity each month. We've got a MikroTik SXT-based link because they're very, very close. Suddenly they went up, they started working, they're saving loads of money, gave me an IT contract because of it. So. And here in Burma as well, we've been helping recently with the core group. They have some fascinating networks with Wi-Fi running. They do radius authentication, which is a cool little thing. They assume that if the MAC address of a PC isn't in their radius database or on the public network, and that's the only place they want you to be. But it's a franchise system, so they have local IT providers, and there's a handful of people around here that we've been given a little bit of help with, so we can get all of the hotels set up in the same way. Another recent one was a hosting centre in Leeds, where we've been doing the perimeter security and also client segregation. So, questions we get asked. Okay. Can we help show engineers how to set up a TIC so that when they're out on the road, they can still fix it? Well, of course, this is something that all IT companies face into. We all want their engineers out on the road earning money. That means there's nobody in the office, and when a customer rings up or a system goes down, how do you fix it? Well, the answer, of course, is you can do it, and we'll go through some bits and pieces in a few minutes. The other one, which is horrible, in that this is a dad joke. How do you catch the ether bunny? No, hands up. Who can catch the ether bunny? You catch it with an Ethernet. Oh, that's bad, isn't it? So why attack? We ran a project just recently in a student block of flats, student education. And these kids, the landlord was complaining because the kids never go out and the Wi-Fi doesn't work. And when he got there was a guy in a room just hacking. All he wanted to do was break the router. And he was doing it for fun. There was no other purpose for it other than he wanted to see if he could. Right? He literally spent all of his time there just trying to learn how to attack IT. And I guess it's a whole new generation, isn't it? I mean, when I was young, we grew up, but we didn't try and break things. He just wants to be able to attack and do it. Some of them, of course, you know, when they grow up, they turn to theft, I suppose, and this keeps happening, doesn't it? You hear it in all the news recently. About 15%, they reckon, Gartner said this, of all attacks in the world are to actually steal things out of the network. And of course, there's the Greenpeace approach as well, isn't there? We just want to put something on a website that's a big, you know, big shocking statement somewhere and make a public statement. Whichever way you go, us guys have a responsibility. We've all chosen to get involved in technical stuff. And we've got a responsibility to make customers' networks safe if we can. And it is really, really important nowadays. So, surely a Tik is perfect, hey? You don't have to do anything. Isn't that right? You can just turn it on, plug it in the network, and it'll just work. Well, they're nearly perfect, I'd say. You know, MikroTik, they're not infallible. They do a pretty good job. They look after us all. But somebody, of course, has to program them. Right? Let's assume all engineers will break something. They'll make a mistake one day. Right? If you do that and approach it in a sensible way, you can avoid problems. So when you're doing firewall rules, Barry showed you in detail earlier on firewall rules, block things very specifically. I'm a little bit paranoid, okay? So Barry was saying, allow specifically, block everything. I'd actually start blocking things as well at the start, and I'll show something a little bit later on. Add lots of comments to your code. Right? Everywhere you go, every interface, every VLAN, every rule, put a comment on it, and that way when your mate comes along and does some more work on it, he knows why you've got it there and why you shouldn't undo it. Develop your own configs for your company and keep them safe, script them. I'm sure you all know how to do /export. Have a standard config that works on a router and you can deploy again and again and again, and your whole company will understand it. Once you all share the same standards, internet security becomes very, very easy. Keep absolutely everything up to date. How many learned from Barry's thing earlier on about firmware as well as the OS? Yeah? Handful of you. Do update absolutely everything on your Tik and Winbox on your PC. Have you ever updated and then found out you can't program your router? Anybody done that? You go do an update on a MikroTik, and actually Winbox on your PC doesn't understand all the features that are there, and so you're missing bits or things don't work. Go and click on the little update button. Naming convention, as well as having your own default config, make sure when you name ports or you add VLANs, you actually give them sensible names. When I'm a coder, and I get into this habit of, if you're building a bridge, start it with bridge minus sign and then what it is. So you actually define the function of everything. So when you're looking through pop-down menus, you understand what all these interfaces are. This might seem like teaching grandma to suck eggs, but actually, next time you come along, or when, as I say, one of your colleagues looks at it, it's far easier for people to understand if you come up with some naming conventions and some standards for how you'll build a router. Changelog. How many people have a changelog for their customers? Look at that, three of you. Changelogs are really, really important. Get things documented, get it into some sort of CRM or a document that people can refer to and understand why things were changed. It makes a massive difference, not only to fixing something when it's gone wrong, but also to why you shouldn't unfix it and allow traffic in the future when you've forgotten what it was for. And prepare, right? Think about what you're doing when you change a firewall, and you won't break it, you won't get locked out. We were talking earlier about whether you should let telnet in and things. Plan your network. I had an engineer just recently got himself locked out of a Tik. Couldn't work out how on earth to get back into it again. Winbox had been bombed because he'd firewalled himself out. Once he understood the topology of his network and drew it down, there was a link from another MikroTik across a VPN, and he could telnet in even though you couldn't use Winbox. So sometimes things like telnet save your life, and they're useful to have, but perhaps only on one segment of the network. Chains. Barry touched on these earlier on. Who does understand the difference between input and forward? Who knows what the input chain is? Come on, guys. About half of you, yeah? Is that right? So, does this work? No. Right. So, when a packet comes into the MikroTik, it comes up here. The first thing you can do with a packet is you can add some extra information to it. You can add some routing information, some packet marks, which can then be used by later stuff in the router. Right? That's all this little bit does here, pre-routing. Once you get to that point, you actually choose whether you're going to route it or whether you're going to handle the packet yourself. Is it coming into you, or is it going to get forwarded through the rest of the network and thrown out somewhere to another segment? That means that the first point you've got to filter something coming into you and block it, really, is on input. And there is a chain here which operates where you can specify on your firewall, operate at this point and check packets. If you're not doing it on there, you're doing it on the forward, where it comes through all of here, does the rest of the stuff we're not dealing with, or I'm not dealing with client traffic, really. But all of your mangle rules, your forwarding for throwing it out, and then your output is handled by the rest of the router. You will only be dealing, in terms of protecting the router, with input. So your first line of defense, Barry touched on this as well, didn't he? Yeah. Everyone knows the default password. You need multiple layers of security, username, password, perhaps even IP address, geographic location. Go change your admin account. Either get rid of it or change it to read-only and set a password on it. Very, very first thing. Is Jono in the room? No? I went on a training course with Jono. He's going to do a presentation after me. First time I met him. I was sat down at Lin ITX doing some work. We were all given a router, told to wipe it, set a config on it. My config kept going wrong. Down. Of course, I hadn't put a password on it. I'd just been dug straight into doing it. Jono was at the other side of the room, hacking my router and constantly changing stuff, more or less undoing what I was doing. Great guy, isn't he? If I can turn his power off when he's doing his presentation, I will. Hi, Jono. Just been telling a story about you hacking my router on the training course. So go change your password. It should be the very, very first thing you do when you get it out of the box. Before you do anything else, go change that. Where do you allow access from, though, on your network? That's the other thing. How many people have networks that are segmented and VLANs and, yeah? About half of you, I guess, third of you. So the biggest thing we see when we go around is you see networks, public connection, where you can get straight onto the router. Even worse, perhaps you can get onto the rest of the network. Think about where you're going to lock down and grant access from and where you're not going to allow access from on your network. Specific interfaces. We talked earlier on about address lists, because address lists filter by IP address. I saw a situation recently where somebody had a workbench for customers that they could plug into, and also a private network for the rest of the business, and the engineer somehow put a private IP address hardwired onto a PC, and it got through all of the interfaces because they were using address lists. And of course, he'd got an invalid IP address, which was a private IP address on the wrong half of the network. It caused a problem because he managed to pick a virus up from it. So the answer in some of that is to actually block by interface as well as by address list. And just limit everywhere else. Just turn it off. The last thing, the very bottom you should have, if you've got any Cisco guys, you know there's a default deny rule which just blocks everything implied. On ticks, you actually have to add it if you wipe the config. Make sure at the bottom of your list you've got an absolute deny rule that blocks everything. So you do want to get organised, and I would suggest you use address lists. Barry says write it down on a bit of paper. I like to do things electronically. So write down your address list, work out what all your subnets are for, give them sensible names. So up here, for instance, we use this thing, SIP providers. So if we've got any VoIP systems in place and we know where their public IP addresses are, we would put these into a list called SIP providers. You just add each one and give it exactly the same name. This is case sensitive. So if you do SIP lowercase p providers and SIP uppercase p providers, actually that's two address lists, and it won't filter for it properly. You do have to be careful to make sure you do it. My home look, of course. Once you've actually planned your network and actually got it documented one way or the other, it's nice and simple. Just keep clicking it and pasting it in. Go control the traffic. So block limited traffic, and this is why I was saying earlier on, block either interface, block by your address list, then allow limited stuff. So say you want port 25 coming in, say whatever you want, allow only the specific ports that you want, Winbox perhaps. Perhaps on your access to your router, you want Winbox, you don't want traffic to be able to go anywhere near any of the other services. There is a real value in turning services off. However, if you don't let traffic in, it can't fly around inside the tick, and they are fallible. They do occasionally make mistakes in coding. don't let the traffic into the router in the first place, then it can't attack a service anyway, apparently. And literally, at the end of your firewall rule, block everything else. Right. Make sure you've got plenty of comments in place. It's a really, really important thing. Lots and lots of people don't do it. They just sit there typing away and trying to block stuff, and you go and look back at it and you don't know what's going on. We had a customer ring up a couple of days ago, 300 lines in a firewall, and he couldn't work out why some traffic wouldn't get through the network. No coding, no commenting whatsoever, and it was a mess. The simple answer, of course, is because it works from the top downwards, we specifically allowed the traffic he wanted in the top, and it suddenly started working. And then he's got a day's job probably unpicking his firewall. So firewall, it's nice and straightforward to do, of course. From the top downwards, it works. So if a packet comes in, it's as if it's falling from the top. If it finds a rule that specifically matches it, it'll process that and then not go any further in the list. If it doesn't do it, eventually it'll fall all the way through until the least specific rule is the block rule at the bottom, and it'll just get thrown away. I like to use these though, look. Right. Source address lists. So this is where we had my LAN, or we had Andy's home, workbench in this case, right? And this is blocking local admin from the workbench. So we're just stopping any form of input coming in from that socket that's got the workbench on it. In this case, it's a VLAN. Pardon me. Here, though, being a little bit more pedantic, we're also blocking the interface if it's coming in from workbench. So we'll allow it to go on forward, we'll allow it to go to the rest of the network and go across the internet, but we won't allow any packet coming in directly at the Tik. There was a virus a little while ago aimed at Tiks, and it would just sit there probing on a PC. Who'd written it, I don't know, but it was just probing, looking for ports, and trying to see if it could get Winbox access. And then looking for, of course, the blank password. So if you go plug into it with a cable, because you've got a workbench PC, you don't know where it's come from, you're trying to repair it, if it's got the virus accidentally, you're exposing your Tik. So just block the interface from areas that you don't want on your network. Where's Berlin? Can I have a drink? Don't forget, though, to allow yourself in. Okay? I've seen too many people do this, remotely as well. Right? Go put a default block rule in, which is a cool thing to do. You've changed your password, you think everything's going well. You just forget to put your own management network in place, and then you go banging your head on the desk like that. Like. So, and if you do that, you end up, if you haven't used safe mode, the little button at the top, then you're wiped out. You're going to go press the reset button unless you've got some other little back door you can think of. Who uses safe mode? Roughly about half. Who doesn't know what safe mode does? Right, so top left in Winbox is a little button called safe mode. If before you start making changes, you turn safe mode on, if you get disconnected for whatever reason, it will revert those changes back to at the start of safe mode, which means 2 or 3 seconds later you can reconnect. If you're doing it remotely, the one big flaw, of course it's not a flaw at all, but the one big thing that you can trip yourself up on is you get involved with a customer who's got TeamViewer up and running. They've got TeamViewer on a PC so you can connect to them. That PC is connected to the Tik, and you accidentally block internet access by changing the firewall rule. Of course, they're still connected to the Tik, because they're on the inside. Now, safe mode doesn't get disconnected, it doesn't revert those changes. And if you haven't got the customer there to go pull the network cable from their PC, because you're locked out forever. I saw it once with a guy running backups, and they had a wireless LAN running all over a city, and they connected in to manage their Tik that way. And they went and made a change, and it was down, and that was it. Middle of the night, all the backups failing. The boss was hollering in because leased lines had effectively been turned off all over the city, because they had to get in the car and drive down. All because they were relying on using TeamViewer instead of opening a port up so they could do Winbox access. Halfway there, though, right? If you go block it this way, you've got a Tik where customers can route through it. You can manage it from your office directly because you've allowed access on your particular ports. You've blocked unwanted access, so it's fairly safe. However, of course, some traffic can still get in, can't it? Because you've allowed specifically traffic. It is more local, but you have allowed it in. So we talked earlier on about fingers, physical security, right? People are right here. Turn off things you're not using, the services. So SNMP, if you're not using it for monitoring and control, go turn it off. UPnP. Why this is involved in what is a very professional router, I don't know, because UPnP is the death of a network, I think. Go disable UPnP before somebody else goes buys another router or something, or the PC plugs it and ticks, yes, I want to configure this for the simplest route possible. Just disable it. The bandwidth test. Anybody use bandwidth test? Yeah, a handful of you. Anybody experience a thing where you leave bandwidth test turned on and your mate thinks it's great to test it, and perhaps he's at another customer's, and he just swamps a broadband line with all the traffic because you've got the bandwidth server and he just thinks that's a handy IP address? Anybody experienced that one? I have. Yeah, go turn it off and turn it on when you want it, turn it off again at the end of it. We have a set of scripts, as I say, which are just standard scripts, and we will just run this on a brand new Tik. And it's very, very quick then to set up a Tik. So we set of scripts that disable all the services, and we'll go turn them back on if we want them. So, as Barry said, you've got to experiment with the Tik yourself. It is really, really flexible. You've got to learn your own processes and your own standards. But once you've got one, just export it. Once you've got a working config, and keep it, and use it every single time. And it's nice and simple if you follow the scripting. Neighbourhood discovery, of course, this is the bit that when you go into Winbox and you've got the little tab there that says neighbours, so you can see any things that are on your layer 2 link. Neighbourhood discovery is a thing that lists it in there. The student accommodation I was talking about, that guy understood he got a MikroTik and Googled it and knew the easy way to manage a Tik was to put Winbox in. We very quickly had to learn that actually these kids are really, really bright. And he was, once he'd got the IP address, he was just trying to hit it constantly. It was locked down, he didn't get in, but we went back and just turned off any services like this. You just got to remember the IP address that you want to connect to and the MAC address if you really mess things up. So as long as you document it, turn these services off, you're going to be far, far more secure. Physical security, go turn the touchscreen off. That's one that hasn't been mentioned today. The touchscreen's the touch of death, really. You know, it's a touchscreen. It invites people to touch it. It's designed to invite you to go press buttons. But actually, if you get it right, you can go change your IP address from there and wipe out the router. So go disable it, or if you want to leave it running because it's interesting, this example here, look, it's got a stats slideshow. That won't show IP addresses or anything really dangerous. It'll just show you the amount of traffic going through, some useful information. And you can leave that so the customer can see it, and it scrolls through the screens. What have we got here? VLANs, yeah. Set up VLANs on your system and learn how to do it if you're not already doing it. I think there were about a third or a half here of people using VLANs. It makes things massively more secure, right? Especially if you get away from VLAN 1. VLAN 1 is the default VLAN. If you're first time around with VLANs, as soon as you plug something into a network, you're going to get VLAN 1, and everybody leaves it as the management network. Just don't do it. Right? Set up a different number and use it, because that way people have to guess the number before they can actually plug in and get a connection, unless you set PVIDs up and make things automatic. So anywhere you're going to do management, move it onto a totally separate network. If you're going to play with unified networks on the top of this, you have to be very careful about how you set up their management network. They like to be on VLAN 1, and you have to set up a PVID so that it comes into the switch on input. It actually gets switched, your VLAN, so it runs through your management network properly for the authentication to work on Unify. But it will work very, very cleverly and in a good way, reliably against a MikroTik. And here, grayed out. Go make sure your ports you're not using are turned off. Right? For two reasons. One, it's a fingers thing. People won't go plug into it, or if they do plug into it, nothing will happen. But also, when your mate comes along, he knows it's definitely dead. If it's turned off, it cannot be doing anything. It's not like an active port that perhaps somebody's unplugged from. It's definitely dead and definitely not in use. It's a bit of documentation as well as security. So, good documentation. Comments all over it are really, really important. Disable ports wherever possible, and you're nearly there. You'll now have a Tik that's got where customers can route through it. You can manage it from your office. If you saw the second rule that was in ours, we had an input rule, which is actually from the Andisa public address in our case. So find out what your public address is that you've got for your office, add an allow rule. Now you can do Winbox access straight from your office and from nowhere else. Then get your engineers to dial into your office with a VPN from your iPad, from your phone, whatever you want. Make sure that they dial into your office before bouncing to the customers rather than going directly. 2 reasons. One is if they're out and about, they're not exposing anything but your own address, and you're in control of that. You can change it easily without affecting your customer if you ever get a problem. All the documentation stays on your network. They never have to actually drag it off and get it on the PCs. They can access that remotely as well. And the customers only ever see contact from your network, so it's far more secure. You're probably in better control of what the antivirus software is doing on your own servers than anywhere else. And if you do it, and somebody does manage to break your network, they still can't browse. They might browse into your network, but they won't bounce into the customer's network as well. It's going to make it far, far harder for them to gain access to your customers. I have seen where a customer got a network breach, they got a horrible crypto virus, and it was down to the IT provider, and it was because they'd left fairly easy remote access open. And the guy had bounced onto the router, reconfigured the router, got a VPN in, and then got access, and then infected the customer's network. And the outcome was a court case, of course. And they lost the customer. If you think hard about how you're going to configure, then unlock it down properly and make it so that, as I say, even if they do get access, they're accessing your network, an interim network rather than the customer's. It's a far better design. The other thing we do regularly is a port scanner. We offer this as an option to our customers, and on our networks we've had a third party do it. It's really worth doing, because you all do your own configs. You think you've got it right, you might not have. Go identify those problems and fix them. Get your standard config fixed, and then hopefully you don't come across it again. There are tools that will run on a BlackBerry that you can leave in place at the customers, £50 device, which will run a network scan, email it back, and you can charge the customer for it if you want. Say it's GDPR and they've got to have it, whatever you want to do. For you, it protects you. For them, it gives them that confidence. VLANs to separate traffic for the customers. So, the obvious thing is internal network, public network, get it on a separate VLAN, don't mix your traffic up. Don't just segregate it by doing a different IP range, because if you do that, you can break it and hack it simply by changing your IP address. This is physical security, really. Go set VLANs up. It's really worth doing. But even consider business cases within their private network. The concept of a high-level department, perhaps the director's department versus reception, have them on different VLANs, semi-public areas like reception where somebody might lean over the counter and plug in. Then think about separate VLANs for different areas. Don't make it too complex, but it is worth breaking down. And then on the Tik, separate VLAN traffic, block it. Somebody rang us up the other week and said, I put VLANs in place, it's not secure, I can still get from one side to the other. And you have to go, yeah, it's a router. It's designed just to route from one network to the other, it's doing its job. So, SSH keys. Do you understand what we're talking about with SSH keys? Yeah? The idea of an SSH key is not that it protects your router, but it tells you the identity properly. It's like having a secret serial number that will alert you when you log onto a router. And if you get your SSH keys so they can't be copied, you've got to remember these guys are manufacturing routers, copying SSH keys onto every one in effect. They come out to you, go change them so they're secure. Then if somebody hacks your router or spoofs it so you think you're connecting to it but you're not, PuTTY will pop up and say, different SSH keys. Be careful, guys. Rename SNMP public. If you're going to use SNMP, change the name of this, don't use public. Clone it. There's always a copy button inside a MikroTik, so if you open up public, for instance, in SNMP, there's a copy button there, you can clone it and then delete the old one. But it's just like the admin password, people know how to hack it and attack it first of all. And then radius. If you've got lots of engineers out there, what happens when somebody leaves? Because that probably means you've got to go log onto hundreds of MikroTiks and go change all the admin passwords if you're going to do it. If you thought about getting them so they've got to dial into you through a VPN before they can get access to your customers, you're halfway there. You can change your own central VPN password and lock it down. Radius is a way where you can give every engineer their own unique username and password, get the MikroTik to authenticate for login against your own Radius server. Now you've got a central point where you can knock out one engineer easily from all of the MikroTiks in one go without having to affect everybody. Massively saves you work. Who uses interface list? Handful of you. It's actually quite powerful. If we do VLANs, we do this. So we'd have some obvious name like block access to management from these networks, and you have every VLAN or every interface that you're plugged into. So maybe, I mean, in simple networks, you have a cable going out to each switch. In this case, we've got VLANs, and we're just blocking any of these VLANs from the management network. We've also got one here for public. So block access to these networks from public. Simple thing we'll touch in a minute. Then go to your firewall. And in the bit where you're spotting what you should filter, you've got an interface list here. Now, one rule blocks all of those networks from having access to your management network in this case. What this means, though, this is the in interface. You can be more specific if you want, but what this means here is that if you start on your management network, you can get to the others and initiate the connection, but you can't come from the others into management, which means you can dial into your router, you can get to your customer's server, even if it's not on this VLAN. You can manage everything else, but the customer can't get into your management network. Interface list is actually quite a cool thing because you're just going to block traffic without even thinking about it. You're literally blocking everything. That's me. If you want help with security or configuring TICs, in particular 2011s, 3011s, 4011s, SXTs, give us a call. Andy Morrison from Andisa IT. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Hi, you touched on input and forward firewalls. How do people feel about output firewalls?
Say that again.
How do you feel about output firewalls?
Output
the
firewalls.
output chain.
They have their place, right? And it really depends what you're trying to do. I mean, in essence, with output, you're protecting something else. You've let all the traffic into your router in the first place and handled it. Right? So why let things into the software in the first place? Because it is a piece of software. So I would always firewall at the start rather than afterwards, unless you're trying to protect something downstream of you. Yeah? Is that okay? Anything else? Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.